All right, Exodus chapter 20. I think this chapter in and of itself has spoken to me in the past few years more than many others. And it sounds weird that chapter that has the 10 Commandments is one that speaks to you. But I really think there's a lot to learn from here. And even if you're not a Christian, you've probably heard of the 10 Commandments before. And many people who aren't Christians, who don't go to church, they see the 10 Commandments or they hear about it. And they think, oh, here's God telling me all the things that I can and can't do, right? When other people hear about the 10 Commandments or you see them places, you may even have friends who say that. You're like, God is just trying to control my life to tell me all the things that I'm allowed to do and that I'm not allowed to do. But they're so much more important than that. The 10 Commandments are more than just do these things and don't do these things. And they're vital for us to understand, to really understand the gospel and the whole context of the Bible. So Exodus is really good about laying some foundations to understand the whole biblical narrative. Narrative is just the story, the whole story of the Bible. Looking at the 10 Commandments is going to be really important to understand all of it. So we're going to dive right in. Let's start reading in verse 1. All right, take out your Bible, Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. It says this, and God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. So we're going to stop right there for a second. Have you ever watched a movie and you see something new that you didn't notice before? That happens to me in shows sometimes. I'll be watching a show that I've seen 100 times, but then you notice something new. When I was reading this week, I noticed something completely new. That's what's awesome about the Bible. You can read it your whole life. I remember since I was a kid, I've been told Bible stories. I've been reading it myself, in different seasons since I was in middle school. And it's crazy that you see something new every time. I never really put together the fact that the 10 Commandments were audibly spoken by God to the people. In most scenarios in Exodus, God speaks to who? Moses. He talks to one dude. And then Moses relays the message and the information to the people. But the Bible tells us that the 10 Commandments specifically were spoken audibly, out loud, by the thundering, powerful voice of God to the people. Imagine the impression that must have laid on them. And God says, remember everything that I've done for you. We talked about this last week. When you remember who God is and what he's done, you fall more in love with him. And when you fall more in love with him, you want to obey him. All right, so that's the context that God gives for these 10 Commandments. He speaks out loud and he says, remember what I did for you. Remember who I am. And now I'm going to give you this moral standard to live by. These principles that are going to guide your life. So we're going to start with the first one. Commandment number 1 is in verse 3. Look at verse 3. Very simple one. First commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. This commandment is laying the groundwork for how all the other commandments are going to roll. All right, God says, this is how relationship with me works. It's exclusive. There's nobody else. No other gods before me. And God knew that the people of Israel were going to be traveling through all these different nations, and they're going to be interacting with different people groups. And so as they're doing that, they're going to learn about these other gods. And these other nations, they had a god of the weather, and a god of wisdom and discernment. And then they had a god of farming and a god of agriculture that would provide different things for them in their own minds. If you sacrifice to that god, it would provide stuff. They had a god of romance. They had a god of sex. They had a god of money. All these different things, they worshiped all these gods. Now, today, we don't necessarily have names and idols for all these things like they had back then, but we worship the same gods, don't we? Like the same stuff. You know someone who's obsessed with money more than anything else. It might be you, but it might just be someone you know, an adult, where you're like, their only pursuit is to get more money. You know someone who's after romance, and it's the only thing that they care about. It's become their god. John Calvin said it this way. He said, our hearts are idol factories that are operating constantly. Think about that. My heart, your heart, is an idol factory. An idol is anything that we elevate above God and put in God's place. And our hearts are like that. They're constantly coming up with new ways to elevate things above God. And the very first commandment, God says, you shall have no other gods before me. He's laying the groundwork here for how he's going to be worshiped. I'm exclusive. I'm the only one. Next commandment is in verse 4. This is the second commandment. He says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven, above or on the earth, beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a what? Jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So why would God have to give the second commandment to images and idols that people would make. Just like in our day, back then, worship was often tied to images, things that you saw. You worship things that you could tangibly see, that you could hold. So different gods in that day would have statues and idols that people would worship. And so it made sense to them. If it was something you could see, then you could worship it. But God tells us that's not the way that he's worshiped. Notice throughout the whole Old Testament, God doesn't show up necessarily in person to people, because he's like, the way that I am worshiped is I'm giving you my word. I'm giving you my voice. Think about how he delivered the 10 Commandments. God could have showed up in front of them in bodily form, an image, something they could see. And so when they see it, when they see something in flesh, they could worship God, but God shows up with his voice. He says, this is the way that I'm going to be worshiped. You're going to worship me by word, not just by image. And in the New Testament, Jesus takes it a step further. We worship God in spirit and in truth, not in image. Image is a way that we start to formulate something in our own mind that we can contain and we can control. And God can't be controlled or contained by our human minds. He's so much bigger than that. So he says, this is how I'm going to be worshiped, by word, by spirit, and by truth. He also has a phrase in here where he says he's a jealous God. And when we think of the word jealous today, we don't usually think of something that's a positive characteristic. Usually it's something negative. But the word jealous here probably could better be translated zealous. And zealous is a long way of saying zeal, someone who has a fire and a passion for you. And God being a jealous God is an important characteristic of who he is. And it sets up a foundation for how he'll be worshipped too. So picture this with me. You decide to get married. You know, you and your wife, you and your husband, you're together. You've decided to pledge your lives to each other. You enter into marriage, and one day your spouse comes to you and says, hey, so I have this request of you. I'm going to ask you to honor me in this. You're, okay, what's up? What's going on? I want you to share me. There's this other person, and can we just share? How would that go over? How would that sound to you if your spouse came to you and asked you that? If my wife came and asked me that, I'd be like, you've got to be out of your mind. Like, we've made a covenant to each other. Like, till death do us part. You remember all that stuff? If I ever did that to my wife, she'd be furious. If you were to enter into a relationship with someone, then they say, I want you to share me. There's no way. Like, those aren't the rules we established from the beginning. I don't share you. When we got married, that's it. This is us forever. Nobody else. When I said yes, when I said I do to my wife, I was saying it's you forever. That's the covenant that we established. It's only you. There's nobody else, just you. And how often do we look at God and say, God, I love you. I want relationship with you. I want to commit my life to you. But can you share me with these other things that I love? Can you share me with my girlfriend, with my boyfriend? Because I really love them. And they're the most important thing in my life right now. And so that whole spending time with you, relationship with you thing, that's going to take a back seat for a little bit because, she's cute, you know? It's what about athletics for you? It's I'm really into my sport right now. I have to train really hard. There's a lot that I have to do to make this happen. So God, can you just share me with this for a little bit? God will not be shared. He's a jealous God. That means he looks at you and he says, I want you and you only. I want your heart exclusively, nobody else. And when you enter into relationship with God, similar to a marriage, you're saying, it's just you. God, it's just me and you. That's it. There'll be no other gods before you. I'm not going to elevate somebody else or something else to the level of God. I'm refusing to allow this relationship to be open, where I'm inviting other things to take your place. God, it's you and you alone. He's jealous for you. That's how much he loves you, because he knows it's what's best for you. God establishes the terms for how he's going to be worshipped, and one of the terms is we have to be all in. He's a jealous God. All right, look at the third commandment. Verse 7, commandment number 3 says this: you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. You might have heard this said, you do not take the Lord's name in vain. That's another translation for this verse. Now, taking the Lord's name in vain, obviously, we should not use the Lord's name in any way where we don't really mean the Lord. So we say the Lord's name, but we're not really talking to him. There's times where we'll be different places and we'll hear people say the words, "Oh my God," and we'll be around our kids. And we taught them very young that you don't say that. And so one time they started correcting other people, which is really embarrassing for us because it's like, okay, it's not a huge deal. So there's just random strangers. We'll be like in Publix and someone will be like, "This is the price of turkey? Oh my God." And my son's like, "It's oh my goodness." Like in the middle of the store, correcting a random old lady at the deli. They're like, "Eli, it's okay. He's fine. He's all right. It is oh my goodness though. Goodbye." Like he'll walk away. But saying those things is part of this command. You know, you've heard people say the name Jesus Christ, and they don't mean Jesus Christ. They're just annoyed at something. And that's part of this command. Is you don't say the name of the Lord and take it in vain. Where you're saying it for something else. You're not really talking to God. You don't really mean Jesus Christ. You're just frustrated. Right? That's part of this. But this is also attributing things to the name of God that you don't really mean, or to elevate yourself. I'll give you this example. This was a joke, a Christian college joke, when people are dating and someone comes up to the other person and goes, "Hey, God told me that we're supposed to break up." And you're like, "Really? God told you that? Like, God said that? Or you just weren't feeling it anymore?" Because there's a big difference. And I know it sounds silly, but think about what they just did. You're attributing to the name of God something that you decided on your own. You're attaching God's name, his holiness, and saying, "God told me this." Really? Even with other life things, we're like, I feel like God's telling me that I'm supposed to quit my job. Really? It doesn't have to do with the fact that they were going to fire you anyway. God's telling you that you're supposed to quit. That you're a terrible employee and they're about to let you go, but for your own dignity, you're like, "I'm just going to quit." And you're going to put the name of God on that, saying, "God told me this." Like, be real with yourself. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. That's attributing the name of God to something that is totally for your own benefit and that God was never involved in the first place. You just made something up in your mind and then you're attaching God's name to it. Be very, very careful. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. We have to honor the name of the Lord. It's a sacred thing. We don't just attach the name Jesus, the name God, to anything. We have to be very careful to honor the Lord in that. Let's continue the fourth commandment, verse 8. It says this: "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, or any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the sea, and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So we talked a little bit about Sabbath in this series, but God gives this as a command. Think about how crazy that is. The Sabbath rest was a commandment from God. Like, it's not an option for the people. He's like, this is one of the 10 commandments. A lot of people forget that. The fourth commandment is Sabbath, to rest. To help us understand this, just recently we had to take my wife's van to get it serviced. So every car needs an oil change every so often, right? And it seems like a minor thing, and it's kind of annoying because oil change you could pay like anywhere from $35 to like $135 for like tire rotation and all the different things depending on where you go. And it's frustrating because like it seems so minor that I have to pay that much money for something that has to happen all the time. And it made me think, I was like, I wonder if this whole oil change thing is just like a scam that people made up where like you have to change the oil in your car. But the reality is, I mean, experts have been doing this for a really, really long time. Mechanics know what they're doing, and it's not a scam. It seems minor, but if you were to go a long time without servicing your car, without getting an oil change, what would happen? It would just stop working. Like you're going to break down on the side of the road one day. Your car is not going to work. And many of us, and myself included, we live lives running and running and running and running, working hard, which is good, going to school, which is good. I know you have summer coming up. A lot of you have jobs now. There's a lot of things that you're doing to work and work and work. And resting one day a week might seem like a minor thing, and you might not notice it for the first like 6,000 miles. But after a while, you're going to break down. God knows you need rest. He gives you this commandment because he loves you. He knows how much you need to chill out and relax once a week, 24 hours where you do nothing but seek him, get to know him, read your Bible, pray, and do things that refresh you, that give life to your soul. That sounds like a weird concept to some of us because we've never done it before. I have a hard time with this, just being honest with you guys. I like to go, and I just need to learn to take a breath sometimes and rest. If I spend a whole day not doing anything, I feel so unproductive. Anybody else? You're like, I feel like I'm missing out on getting stuff done. Some of you are honest right now. You're like, I'm missing doing things, and I need to get things done. I need to check stuff off my list. But God gives us a commandment to rest. That's how important the Sabbath is. He gives it as one of the 10 commandments. Take some time every week, 24 hours, and just rest. All right, verse 12, commandment number 5. This one's a tough one for many of us. It says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now, Paul reminds us in Ephesians about this commandment that this is the only command with a promise attached to it. The commandment that says, honor your father and mother so that you may live long. There's a promise that you'll have a long life if you honor your father and mother. Now, why would God give this as a command, honoring your parents? Well, one of the reasons honoring parents, honoring the older generation that's raised you is an important piece to society. If young people always were just skeptical and defiant toward older generations, life would be chaos. Everything would be out of whack. And whether you realize it or not, your parents are wise. Like, they know some stuff. You may have had a couple moments where you've seen that. Some of you are like, my parents don't know anything. They're out of their minds. They do. Like, they're wise. They've lived life. And it may not sound like it to you, and their delivery of how they say things may not be a way that you want them to be. But if your parents love Jesus, they're following the Lord, they have wisdom, and you are called to honor them. Guess what? Even when you don't agree with them. And that's the harder part. I don't agree, mom and dad. I don't agree, mom. I don't agree, dad, with what you're telling me, what you're asking me to do, but I'm going to obey and honor you anyway. You know how hard that is to do? To obey something you don't agree with? But guess what? It's a commandment from God. Obedience to your parents is a command, not an option. We're called to obey and honor them even when we don't agree, even when we don't see eye to eye. I know that's difficult. For a minute, take a deep breath. All right. Some of you even right now, you're like, I had an argument right before I came to church with my parents. Maybe on the car ride home, you say, hey, I'm sorry, and I want to honor you because God tells me to. It might be a good thing to do. All right, let's keep reading. We're going to read the next 6 commandments, or commandments 6 through 10, together, all at once, because I think they kind of get lumped together in this passage. So look at verse 13. It's kind of rapid fire here. God says, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant or his ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, all of these commands to round out the 10 have to do with the way we treat other people. And so God is saying the way you treat other people matters. And I think cultures all around the world have all agreed for centuries that these things are wrong, whether they acknowledge the 10 commandments or not. Like, everyone would say murder is wrong. Killing for no reason, it's like a wrong thing. Everyone would agree theft, taking someone else's personal property that doesn't belong to you, that rightfully belongs to somebody else. Like, everyone would agree that's wrong. Spreading lies, bearing false witness against somebody else, slandering someone, saying things that you know are not true that's going to defame somebody else and make them looked down upon by other people, everyone would agree that that's wrong. If that's ever been done to you, if you've ever been lied to or stolen from or cheated on, like, you know how wrong that feels, because the law is written on our hearts more than it's just written on these tablets that Moses is going to have. We all have an awareness of this moral standard. God wrote it on our hearts when he created us. But most of us would say, we look at these things and we haven't personally committed many of these, right? We would look at, you shall not murder. And you're like, well, check, I haven't done that one. You shall not steal. You're like, okay, I haven't really stolen anything. You shall not commit adultery. You're like, I'm definitely good on that one. But Jesus kind of redefined the heart of these commandments in the New Testament. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard it said, you shall not commit murder. But I say, if you have hatred in your heart towards somebody else, you've already committed the act in your heart. He said, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But if you lust after a woman, or if you lust after a man, you've already committed the act in your heart. Jesus went to the real definition of what these commandments were supposed to accomplish. It's the posture of your heart. It's not just the act. And all of these things, how we treat other people, it's not just in action. but sometimes it happens in our minds and our hearts too. So we're going to continue reading what happens after God gives the 10 commandments. All right, so look at verse 18. This is the people's response to receiving the 10 commandments from God. It says, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear and they stayed at a distance. Now remember, this is part of the story. Staying at a distance away from God, away from his holiness, was part of the way that they were being protected. Because they couldn't, as sinners, they couldn't approach the holiness of God. But look at what they say after this. Verse 19, and they said to Moses, speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Verse 20, Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. God's come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. But the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Think about that. You hear the audible voice of God. You think, oh, that has to be so comforting. But the people tremble with fear. And they tell Moses, hey, tell God, don't speak to us. Like, you go up and have conversations with him. You go do your thing and then just come down and tell us what he says. If you can just go handle all that relationship stuff and then just come back and talk to us, and we'll follow all the stuff. We'll do all the rules, but you go talk to God. We don't want anything to do with knowing him. We'll just know what he wants to say. And I can fall into this pattern in my relationship with God too. I want to hear from God more than I want to actually know him. You ever been there before? You ever been in that place where you're like, I've spent my life trying to obey the rules that God gives or hear what God wants me to do? Some of you who are graduating or you're juniors about to be seniors, like, what am I going to do with my life? What college am I going to go to? And the most important thing in your life right now is hearing something from God about the next step you're going to take rather than actually knowing Jesus himself. Like, God, just give me a word of what I'm supposed to do next, and then I'll worship you. And it doesn't work like that. God says, I want to know you. Even though he's inviting his people into relationship with him, they're like, nah, we're good. Moses, you go up and do your thing. You talk to him. And then you just relay the message. We want the words. We want the message. We want to hear what God has to say, but we don't want any kind of relationship with him. Man, do I fall into this. All the time. We want revelation without relationship. Give me the rules. That's what they were saying. Just tell me what I have to do. Tell me every way that I'm supposed to structure my life. Give me the rules. And I used to think of Christianity like this. And maybe some of you in this room still do. Look at me. I want you to hear this because this is how I live most of my life in my relationship with God. It's like, just tell me what I have to do. Give me all the rules and we'll go from there. Just tell me what I got to do. And even verses like this, John 14, verse 15, this is how I would read this. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Anyone ever heard this before? This is Jesus speaking. He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And I used to read it like that. It was like, if you love me, you're going to do what I tell you to do. Javan. Oh, like I had this picture of God with a disappointed look on his face, just like a snarl. Like, oh, like I was watching Liverpool lose the Champions League final today. Just like, just a snarl on his face. Disgusted with me that he didn't score a goal. I mean, didn't do the right thing. Like just looking down on me like, with this disappointed look. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. But what God wants from me more than just obedience is love. And just recently I was challenged with this. We were watching a video in one of our staff meetings. And there's a different way to read this verse. You can read it like this. You say, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You see the difference? Love comes first. Obedience comes after. If you really love me, keeping my commandments won't be a very difficult thing to do. Because you don't want to hurt someone that you love. You want to please them, don't you? If you really love someone, you don't take joy in hurting them. And I've begun to see this from a different perspective. And maybe for some of you, you start to see Christianity from a different perspective when you see it like this. When it starts with love first and then obedience second. You say, if I genuinely love Jesus, I'll obey what he asked me to do. John says it a different way in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. He says, this is love for God, to keep his commands. He's reiterating something that Jesus said. This is love for God, to keep his commands, and his commands are not what? Burdensome. And some of you might be like, my whole life, Christianity has felt nothing but burdensome. It's felt like all these rules that I have to follow. And maybe you've been approaching God like the Israelites. Just give me the rules. Give me everything that I have to do. And your whole faith has been about performance. What can I do to obey all the rules so that I can have relationship with God? And you have it backwards. I'm here to tell you, please listen, you have it backwards. The main goal is not give me the rules. The goal is give me Jesus. Help me to know Christ, to see him more clearly, to fall more in love with Jesus, to know him in relationship. And when I know Jesus, all the other stuff, all the commands, I do because I want to, because I get to, not because I have to. You see the difference? We love Jesus first. We turn our attention to Christ first. We don't say, give me the rules. Just tell me everything that I have to do. Tell me the college I'm supposed to go to. Tell me the next step that I'm supposed to take in my life. Just give me all the messages. And God says, no, I want your heart. I want you. And when you genuinely love Jesus, the commands, the things he asks you to do, become a pleasure for you and not a burden. So I want to do something a little different tonight. We have a really cool opportunity to hear from one of you, a student who I heard his story recently, and it has to go along with what we're talking about tonight. And so I want you guys to hear it because I think it's really impactful to hear from one of your peers that's really embodying this and living this, and the difference between I'm just obeying these commands because that's what Christians are supposed to do, right? I love Jesus, and out of that love for him, I want to do things that honor him. So please welcome Sergio as he comes up. He's going to share a little bit of his story. Come on, put your hands together for Sergio. Sergio is a senior. You go to Pompano, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, from Pompano High. So first thing I asked Sergio to do when I talked to him this week was just share a little bit of his story. So if you could just tell us a little bit of like the past maybe 6 months, what's gone on in your life, maybe a little bit of how you were raised and like how God has just been working in your life recently.
Okay, got it. So I'm a little nervous, I'm not going to lie. But so I used to live this life where, I did a lot of just the opposite of what God wanted. I was really rebellious. I'd go to parties and I would chase all these things so momentarily, they're like highs that leave you empty, and there's this calling, there was like a greater purpose for me. And so I just kept digging it, and I kept asking my mom what this was about, and she just just talk to God, talk to God. And so I talked to God, and I'm here. I'm really happy that all the mistakes I made, brought me where I'm at right now.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I met Sergio, it was like 4 or 5 months ago probably.
Yes, correct, through my sister.
Yeah, so it was crazy. I met his sister Stephanie at Tijuana Flats, and I was just like, hey, you should come to HSM. She's like, oh, I go to the sanctuary. I was like, that's cool, come here. And so they showed up on a Sunday morning, which is really cool. Sergio is part of the Sunday crowd. And just since then, it's just been crazy to see, Jesus has really changed your life. It's cool to see transformation happen. And just knowing him for a short period of time, what I've gotten to see and witness is the transformation happened first, which is really cool. Correct. And then the obedience happened second, kind of like we're talking about. So we had a conversation last Sunday. I'd love for you to share a little bit about this, a specific situation that happened in your life where you're like, all right, I obeyed Jesus and it was awesome. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. So prom was last Friday, and, I think everyone was looking forward to the after party, not actually the special moment of everyone just dancing, it's our last time together. Mm-hmm. And so, I already know that all the bad stuff to avoid, and they're all distractions. And so, we went to prom and we were in a party bus, and everyone around me, it was 20 of us, 18, and, everyone was just drinking and smoking, and I was just there. For them, I was probably the weird kid, but to me, they were all the weird kids because, it's why are you doing this? It's all a distraction. And I felt really good because, I wasn't doing it because like Javan says, I have to, I wanted to, I know this is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. I can't be saying I'm walking with God, showing up to church and reading and then doing the opposite, it's not right.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's such a cool story too of you genuinely showed up to this of like, all right, I'm going to prom. It's like, you knew what you were walking into, right?
Correct.
Like, you're like, I know what I'm walking into. This is a situation where I'm going to be surrounded with all this stuff that was like my former life. Like, these were things that you probably wouldn't even think twice about it before.
Correct.
You're like, you would just indulge in all of it. Yeah.
Yes.
And so going into it, you're like, no, that's not me anymore. Like, this isn't my life. I love what you said. You're like, people are probably looking on at you like you're the weird kid.
Yes.
You're like, why are you doing this? And they probably remember you too, right? Some of your friends.
Well, yeah.
Like,
I mean, I think that.
or they remember like what you used to be like.
Correct. So yeah.
Did anyone ask you anything? Like,
No,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah. They're like, are you gonna drink? I'm like, no, I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I messed with them throughout the whole night. You know, I was like, you know,
what are you doing?
yeah. You guys want to go on a run?
You want to go on a run?
Yeah, correct. But it's all right. You know.
Yeah. No, that's cool though, and that's such a cool practical example. And I'm glad that you got to share this with us too, because just a small story like that, like this was an opportunity for me to just say, I'm going to throw away the commands of God and just do what I want to do. But there's something about a love for Jesus. We're just like, I genuinely love God and I want to do this. And one of the other parts that I want you guys to hear from this story, if you notice what Sergio said, he said, it felt so good to do the right thing, right? It's like you had this feeling of just like, why would I ever like run away from this relationship to go do the wrong stuff? Like I want to love Jesus, and because I love him, I want to obey him. So it's really cool. Thank you for being willing to come up and share your story. I know you were nervous. I'm proud of you. That was awesome. Yeah, give it up for Sergio. Great job, man. That was so cool. If you have questions for Sergio, he'll be signing autographs after. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, we're going to close in verse 22. Verse 22 on to the end, and then we're going to finish in worship after that. But this is the most important part of the Ten Commandments, this last final section. All right, so pay attention here. Follow me. Verse 22 of Exodus 20. He's given the commandments. The people are like, we don't want to talk to God. Moses, you go talk to him. This is what happens. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites this. Now pay close attention to what we read right here. You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Whatever or wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. And private parts just means like their leg. If it was like a priest doing a sacrifice, they needed to be fully covered before the Lord. Now, the reason I say this is the most important section of the Ten Commandments is because without this part, the Ten Commandments really are just a list of do's and don'ts. Just a list of commands, things that you're supposed to do. Honor your father and mother. Don't make any idols. Don't murder. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. It's all just a list of do's and don'ts without this part. God gave these commands to his people to help them, but, listen to this, but God knew that they could never fully obey all of these. As soon as he gives his commands, what's the next thing he gives them? Sacrifices and atonement. The very next thing. God gives the Ten Commandments, and then he says, all right, now make an altar where you can sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings and sheep and goats, because I know you're not going to be able to do this completely. There's no way you're going to be able to keep up with all of these. Our sinful humanity, that sin that's in us is so deeply rooted that there's no way possible that every single one of us are perfect in all of these areas. If you honestly think back over your life and you look at the Ten Commandments like a mirror, you're like, okay, what does my life look like when I look at the Ten Commandments? I bet you in some way, shape, or form, especially the way that Jesus defines the heart of them, we've broken every single one. You've had hate in your heart to the point where you've wanted someone dead. You've had lustful thoughts toward another person, where you've thought actions in your mind, and maybe you didn't act it out in person, but you've thought certain things, where you've committed adultery in your heart and in your mind. Like every one of us has fallen short in all 10 commandments. And the very next thing God does is make an altar of earth, a humble, simple offering, so that the wrath of God against sin, against breaking these commandments, can be transferred from you to an animal. That's what atonement is. It's atoning for your sin so that God looks at your sin and says, I'm going to place that on this innocent sacrifice so they pay the penalty of death and not you. A simple, humble altar. In every single part of the book of Exodus, this is my favorite part of this. You guys probably noticed that. My favorite part of this entire book is everything is pointing to the cross of Jesus Christ. The commandments, listen to me, the commandments are for our benefit and they still apply to us today. We should still strive to obey them. It's a moral standard that God has laid before us that we should still obey, okay? But the commandments were always meant to be a sign pointing us to Jesus. The 10 Commandments are like an MRI. Does anyone have an MRI before? They kind of like diagnosis something. You have to go into a machine. The 10 Commandments are like that. An MRI does what? It diagnoses you. It helps you to understand where you're hurt. Can an MRI heal you? Can it do anything to make you better? No. Sometimes if you're claustrophobic, it probably makes this issue worse. Worse. Where's worse? No. Makes it worse. All right? An MRI can't heal you. It was never meant to heal you. It's meant to reveal the problem. And the 10 Commandments are like that. It was never meant to save you. If you just say, give me the rules, I'll do all the right things so that I can have a relationship with God, it is not going to work. I promise you I've tried. I've tried for most of my life to do all the right stuff, say all the right things, do all the right stuff, and just if I can make sure I obey all the commands, every rule that God has given me, then I'll have a relationship with God. And God says, that's not why I gave you this. All the while, the 10 Commandments are meant to point us to Jesus. Paul says it this way in Galatians 3:24. This is where we'll end. The law was our tutor to bring us to Christ so that we might be justified by faith. That's what the law is. Someone like a teacher, like an instructor that holds your hand, says, I'm just bringing you there. I'm just a messenger bringing you to your real destination, which is Jesus. And along the way, there's been plenty of people who become obsessed with the messenger and be like, well, why can't we just hang out? We can just stay here. And the law, the tutor, the messenger is like, no. I'm just here to get you there. Be honest with yourself for a second before we worship Jesus. Like, you've broken all of these in some way. Guess what? Even if you've broken one of them, you're guilty of breaking the law. And so am I. Like, I look at the 10 Commandments, I'm like, my life does not line up with that. And that's okay. Seriously, that's okay. It's revealing to you how much you need a Savior. It's revealing to you that you needed someone to go and obey every single commandment for you and to be the sacrifice. And just like God said, make an altar out of earth, simple, no precious stones, nothing that would attract attention. There was a little baby born in a simple manger, attracted very little attention, grew up in humble beginnings. Throughout his ministry, preached a gospel of grace, and he paid the ultimate penalty and sacrifice for you. The law was meant to bring us to Christ. 10 Commandments is so much bigger than a list of do's and don'ts. My challenge to you tonight is this. Don't look at Christianity as just a bunch of things you have to do or a bunch of sins you have to avoid. Jesus wants your heart. He loves you. And when you love him in return, you get to obey him.